Welcome back for another video update. This tank has now been set up for 1 year, and what a year it's been. So earlier this year, it took me a while to get this side of my tank just right. I reworked the rocks quite a bit, but now I'm really happy where it ended up. I've added a bunch of new Acropora to this tank, but I've also gotten rid of a lot of coral over the past year. I even had Vic from Worldwide Corals come by and showcase my tank on their channel. This update will include the current state of my aquarium along with some future plans. If you're new to my channel, this will be a good introduction to me and my aquarium, so stay tuned and enjoy. I will talk about some of the things that haven't gone well in my tank, but I think the biggest theme for the year is explosive Acropora growth, and I'm pretty happy about that. When I initially stocked my prior Red Sea Reefer, I went with fast, easy growing, classic Acropora. They tend to grow faster, they don't have this long dormant period like some of the fancier SPS that take years before they start growing. Most of them will start growing immediately. I don't like the look of an empty tank with a ton of little 1-inch frags, so I wanted something that would fill the tank in quickly. So some of these colonies in my tank are a good 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4 years old, and they've gotten a lot bigger, but they're nothing really that fancy. So now that the tank looks full with some of these bigger colonies, I thought it would be a good idea to start adding in some more fancier SPS frags and let those kind of grow out. And then as those fancier pieces get bigger and take up more room, I would then eventually kind of phase out the older, not as exciting acro colonies. Now I've added a few corals this year that I'm pretty excited about. So one is this Tyree Superman Tenuous. This thing is super blue and I'm super excited about it because I love blue corals. I got a nice frag of the rainbow splice. And when I initially first saw it, I didn't think much of it. It seemed to be very overhyped for just a green coral with some red swirls. But after seeing it in person, it's pretty sweet looking. So I'm very excited to see how this one grows. Sexy's Orange Passion. Can't wait to see this one grow out. Along with the Home Wrecker. I've had it before and it died on me for some reason, but I was able to get a new piece. One coral that kind of woke up for me this year is the Orange Creamsicle. I've had it for well over a year, but it just encrusted for a while. And in the last few months, it's really started to grow quickly. So I'm excited to see how this one fares this year. So this past year I had some Ghani colonies get really large, and instead of fragging them up, I ended up just getting rid of them because I didn't have a lot of space for them. But since getting rid of the Euphilia and moving those over to my nano tank, I wanted to fill this space in with some more flow. So I ended up getting some more Ghani frags. So we'll see how those do. I really like them a lot, and Ghani seem to grow pretty well in my tank, so we'll see what happens. So Vic from Worldwide Corals was here about a month ago to film my tank, which is actually up on their page now. After talking with him, I asked him, because I know in their display tanks they put a lot of zoanthids next to Acropora. I asked him if there was ever an issue with zoanthids pissing off acros and kind of killing them, and he said never. So I'm going to add a lot more zoanthids back to my tank, because that was the only reason why I kept them off the rocks as much as possible. I have added some new variants this year, so I'm happy to kind of switch up some of the zoanthids that I've had for so long with some new stuff. And then eventually I'll be planting them around the tank. This year hasn't been all fun and games though. I have had a few issues with some acros. My last 2 videos I documented a more recent STN event that I've been going through, and I don't think I'm out of the woods yet, but I did find a cracked heater that was rusty. Now I'm not going to go over the whole saga again because I've documented my last 2 videos, but I'm hoping that I found the issue and hopefully things recover. But there's still some collateral damage. There's still some minor STNing. Other than the initial affected corals that I covered, a few more have shown a little signs of wear and tear along the edges of their encrusting part. But interestingly enough, none of the branches or tips or anything else like that has shown any issue. Still have great color, still have great polyp extension. My alkalinity demand is still rising. So I figure if my tank was sick or the Acropora weren't doing well, they wouldn't be growing and consuming calcium. So the fact that they're still consuming calcium and then I still have to dial up my 2-part tells me that whatever's going on it's not affecting most of the coral in my tank. So I'm not going to let that concern me. I think with some of these challenges I've had this last year, and don't get me wrong, most of this tank has been super successful. I usually focus on the 1 or 2 things that go wrong because when things go right, it's very fun and easy and you forget about it. But when things go wrong, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, you kind of obsess over that and try to make it perfect. One thing I need to remember is this is a hobby. Hobbies are supposed to be positive aspects of your life and bring joy and happiness, not misery and stress. So the minute something in this tank stops being enjoyable and starts bringing me stress, I've learned to just get rid of it. So I had a coral that was brown and green and ugly when it was supposed to be rainbowy. It still grew from a small piece to a large colony. Instead of looking at it every 5 minutes and obsessing how ugly it is, I just got rid of it. I sold a couple frags to a guy and I said, hey, you want this colony? It's ugly for me, maybe it'll be good for you. He was happy to take it. Or if I had a colony start to STN, instead of trying to save the whole colony by dipping it or moving it and all that, I would just cut off anything that looks healthy and just trash the rest of it, knowing that once something starts to STN, the chance of saving it is very, very low. Now I had a pink millie right here that once it started to go, I decided I didn't want to look at a half dead millie anymore. So I cut the whole thing out, saved 2 pieces. The whole thing died except a 1-inch piece that I still have. Now I'm hoping that that little piece will survive. If it does, great. If it doesn't, pink millies seem to be a dime a dozen. So my advice to you is if there's something in your tank bothering you and you stress all about this one little thing, but you have this giant tank full of beautiful corals and fish, just remove the thing that's giving you all the misery and stress and be done with it. I really like Oregon blue tort, but for some reason it grows for me and then all of a sudden it starts to RTN a little bit here and there. I'm to the point now where even though it's my favorite coral, if the 2 pieces that I have don't make it, then I'm just going to be done with Oregon tort for a while, because I'd rather not stress about it than have my favorite coral in my tank and have it struggle. So bottom line is, this is a hobby, keep it fun. The minute it stops being fun, get rid of that part that is not fun. Some other things that bothered me throughout the year that I've kind of solved is I had some coral frags that either didn't look right or weren't growing as fast, or just I was not happy with them. I gave some of them away. I put some in my frag tank. Basically, I'm keeping them in case they turn into something great, but I got them out of my display tank, so I stopped looking at them, and every time I look at my tank, I go, that damn thing won't grow, or it's still ugly. When's it gonna get nice? Now I don't think about it, and maybe 3 or 4 months from now, I'll look in my frag tank and go, hey, where the hell did that come from? So it's something to think about. So while I hope I fixed my SPS STN issue in the tank, if for whatever reason all of my Acropora die, or most of them die, and I have my first tank crash in 17 years, then I think what I might end up doing is take a break from the fancier Acropora, maybe keep some easier SPS, but kind of go back to a mixed tank. And I might go more leather dominant because I have a soft spot for leather corals. I don't know why. Anything that grows up into the water column, like Acropora or leather corals, I just think is awesome. So if, God forbid, this crashes, which I don't think it will, but you never know. If it does, I think I might try to make the best softy dominant tank you've ever seen. So we'll see what happens. As you can see, my fish are as fat and happy as they've ever been. This triggerfish eats way too much. I have a 6-line wrasse that used to be in this tank that I moved to my sump. The reason was my mandarin was looking very, very skinny. So I thought that maybe the 6-line wrasse was eating all the pods and the mandarin didn't have any food to eat. So I ended up catching it. So the fish trap I bought did not work, but my old do-it-yourself fish trap did work. So what this is a mason jar, and then you put a Ziploc bag, cut the top so it allows for an inlet of the fish size, and then you push it in so it's a funnel, kind of goes in. So the fish goes in, freaks out, and tries to come out at the bottom or the top and gets caught. So that seemed to work on my 6-line. I did try to catch it a few times in the regular trap, but when I pulled the magnet off the glass, it would jump out before it captured it. I never saw any direct aggression from the wrasse, but after I moved the wrasse, I started seeing the mandarin come out and about a lot more, and it started to put on a lot of weight very quickly. I will say now she's probably overweight, so I'm glad I did that. It probably helped too that I started dosing phytoplankton, which a few weeks after I started dosing that, I noticed pods all over my glass, which I haven't seen in years. My clownfish is about 9 years old now. Her mate died 2 years ago. When I had the male in the tank, she was very aggressive. I mean, they had eggs every 2 to 3 weeks. And anytime I put my hand in the tank, she would go straight to attacking my hand. She would bite the webbing between my fingers and draw some blood every now and then. Since he passed from a bacterial infection, she hasn't really shown any aggression towards me or any other fish, so she's a pretty good fish now. So the yellow tang, I still consider this guy the star of the tank because he will eat any kind of algae that's in my tank. I have a little bit of cyano here and there, which is normal, but I don't really have any macroalgae at all in the tank. And if I do have any from like my frag sump, I'll put it up in the tank and he'll clean it off immediately. So this one tang in my large tank keeps the entire thing algae free. So for that reason alone, the yellow tang is probably my favorite fish in the tank. Another change I might make this year with respect to fish is I might go back to a sand bed in this tank. Now I know I made a video about how awesome bare bottom is and kind of swore by it and how sand beds suck. Now that is true, sand beds do suck. However, I have some red planaria in this tank and it's not plague proportions, but I see it enough to where when I look at the rocks, that's all I see. So I was thinking of adding a sand bed to this tank. I want to get a few wrasse, maybe a melanaris, maybe a yellow chorus wrasse, maybe a leopard wrasse, which I've never kept. So I need the sand for those, but then to keep it clean, because my biggest issue with sand beds is keeping it clean. Otherwise, I love the look of it. Now, it will make flow in this tank a little more difficult. I might have to scale some things back or get a little creative. But in my nano tank, I got this little lynx goby, and it keeps the sand crystal clear. So sand sifters from Biota, since they're captive raised, seem to fare much better in captivity than the wild caught, because mine will eat flake food, it eats pellets, it eats mysis shrimp. So I'm not worried about it starving. So I might be able to put a couple of those in here. I don't mind doing a little maintenance on it since I do maintenance on the bare bottom anyways, but I figure I'll give it a shot, especially if I want to try some wrasses in this tank. In terms of hardware, I haven't made a lot of changes to the tank over the past years. I really like to keep things simple and I subscribe to a low maintenance tank. So here's how I run my tank. I run a lot of flow in this tank. I have two MP40s and a Gyre Jump 4K on the back wall. Plus I have a Tunze Stream 3 on the bottom right of the tank that blows at 100% all the way down the back of the tank. This keeps the bottom of my tank pretty clean. Previously where the Gyre is, I had a Tunze 6105. It stuck out into the tank too far and some of my corals were not growing very well because it was kind of intruding into their space. About every week or two, I'll take a power head and I blow off all the rocks. There's still a lot of gunk that comes up even with the amount of flow I have in my tank. I don't think you're ever going to get to a point where you don't have detritus settling in spots. I even have a few coral colonies that I have to blow off twice a week just because they accumulate so much crap. My lighting has not changed since I set this up. I still run these 3 first-gen ATI Straton LEDs, and I'm super happy with them. To say they're quiet is an understatement. They virtually produce zero noise. They blanket my tank with light, almost like a T5, but they still have that LED pop and a slight shimmer, much more than what T5s would have alone. They look really nice both visually above the tank and how they illuminate the corals, so I don't have any plans to change them at this point. I also still run the Noop Seesh over my frag tank and my sump, which is okay, but I do get some weird shading on the acros down there. The softies and the LPS around the edges seem to do fine, but at some point this year I may swap that light out for something more like a panel light or some strip lights just to make sure that the acro frags I have down there don't have any weird shading. My filtration has not changed since I set this tank up. I still have the Deltec 1000i skimmer and I still use UV filtration. I do run mechanical filtration like once a week for a day after I do a water change, but I don't run any carbon or GFO or any other types of chemical filtration. My skimmer does a decent job. I don't really try to tweak my skimmer too much. I just turn the pump all the way up, but I don't really care because I don't have an algae or a nutrient issue. The main thing that I care about with my skimmer is aerating my tank. I have the CO2 scrubber still hooked up to it, so really as long as it's pulling air through that CO2 media, it keeps my pH high and that keeps me happy. Some of the other equipment I use, I still have the Trident, which keeps up with my water testing. I don't let it control my dosers, but I use it to keep an eye on any major trends. I also spot check it every week. I have the dosers where I dose my 2-part, and a new addition I added this year was I started dosing kalkwasser at night. The main reason why I started dosing kalkwasser was to keep my pH up along with my CO2 scrubber, but it does make a dent in my calcium and alkalinity demand. So it's cut down the amount of 2-part that I've had to add. Other than the Apex and the Trident, along with a heater and a return pump, I don't run anything crazy in this tank. I try to keep it pretty simple. Some major changes this year. I have tweaked a lot of the rock work, which I made videos on. The left side of my tank just didn't look right. I had a really nice arch that was covered in AOI zoanthids and a dragon fruit Monty, but they were going out of control and growing over all of my other corals. So I ended up removing that rock and then built a new arch for a bunch of Acropora. I also killed off all of the encrusting Monties in my tank, and I had some Discosoma mushrooms in my tank that needed to be killed back as well. So when it comes to maintenance, I do a 20-gallon water change every week, which I think takes care of a lot of my element replenishment. I don't think I have a nutrient issue in my tank, so the water change is more just to make sure that it's getting replenished with, the minerals it needs and taking out anything else that I'm not really testing for. I've also started to replace my RO membrane annually, which I know they're supposed to last 3 to 5 years, and I started changing my pre-filters every 3 months. The Washington, D.C. water company uses chloramines from time to time, so I'm not going to take my chances of that seeping through. So ever since I started changing my RO membrane more frequently, I've noticed less issues with my water. I'm still using Instant Ocean, and I've been using it for about 15 years or so, and have never had a reason to switch. I mean, after all, it is the world's #1 sea salt. About every week, I'll take a power head and I'll blow off all the rocks and corals to get all of the settled gunk up into the water column. And then I use a marine land polishing filter to kind of clean out the tank. About every month, I'll scrape the back panel of my tank and the bottom glass just to keep it looking crisp. I also like to clean out my frag section of my sump about every month or every other month. I don't have any fish down there that eat algae, so I'll get some algae down there from time to time. So I'll take everything out, soak it in vinegar, scrub it down just to kind of keep it nice and fresh. About every 3 months, I'll take my skimmer out and I'll give it a solid acid bath. And then I clean the power head that's down there as needed. Not long after setting up this tank, I switched from BRS 2-part to the ESV B Ionic, and I did that because it has major and trace elements in it. Since switching over, I've noticed that the tank seems much healthier, which is obviously anecdotal, but it makes me feel good at night. I dose sodium nitrate to keep my nitrate up. Since my phosphate seems to stay at 0.1 ppm no matter what my nitrate's at, if I stop dosing nitrates, my nitrates will bottom out and the corals end up suffering. So no matter how much I feed, I can't get my nitrates up, so I just dose sodium nitrate. Other than that, I don't really dose anything other than Fido and Oyster Feast, which is more for food. If I was to do it over again, I would love to start from scratch so I can customize the rock work a little bit better. When I upgraded my Red Sea Reefer to this tank, I had to work quick since the rocks were covered in coral. So most of the rocks are just kind of stacked on top of each other. I used a few zip ties here and there, but I would really love to spend more time creating a really nice aquascape. I mean, I'm happy with what I have now, but it's not perfect. I would love to be able to integrate flow pumps into the rock work a little bit better as well. Mine are kind of just hanging up on the top back panel, and they're quite visible when you're looking at the tank. Also, there's certain corals I wouldn't add again. Like, don't get me wrong, they're nice, and I'm not going to get rid of them anytime soon. But if I was to start from scratch, I probably wouldn't buy them again. So this wraps up the 1-year update on my tank. If you have any questions or just want to say hi, please leave a comment below. And if you didn't get the hint earlier, please like and subscribe if you like my stuff. If you don't like my stuff, then that's okay too. And on that note, I'm going to end this now. Stay tuned for much more to come. Thanks, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.